All right, welcome back. After a little short break due to a unforeseen hurricane situation, we're going to pick back up in what I think is one of my favorite parts. Now, I haven't taught American literature in, 12 years. This is my first year of teaching it in a while, and I forgot how much I really enjoyed this colonial part. And I don't really like the Puritan readings all that much, but I do enjoy the political nature of this. I really enjoy talking about how much we've misunderstood some of the things that were said and done, and actually lost the value of some of them as well. You know, we study these things, but we really don't know how much impact they truly had. A great example of that is what we're going to study today, which is Patrick Henry's "Give Me Liberty" or "Give Me Death" speech, which honestly probably was, the final push that really caused, in a lot of ways, the American Revolution to happen. At least in my opinion. I feel like without this speech, a lot of people would have been more hesitant to go to war. This thing galvanized. And of course, it was delivered in the state of Virginia. This wasn't before like a whole bunch of people as far as the entire country, but Virginia was kind of the driving force in this. So we really needed them to cement this, to get this war going. And Patrick Henry's speech turned a lot of people at this convention from being loyalists to agreeing with him. Now, I wouldn't say it changed them maybe from being loyalists, but maybe debating to go to war or not. This was the thing that pushed them. So as we get into this, we're going to look at some things that are important in his speech. And we're going to see how this parallels also in the next two things we're going to cover, which we're going to talk about the Declaration of Independence and then Crisis Number 1 from Thomas Paine. So all three of these are usually taught together, and they have a lot in common. So we're going to look at several important rhetorical devices he uses. A rhetorical device is just something that is used to make something stick in your brain, something to make it more memorable, something to make it more effective. And there's certain techniques that people purposefully use. These aren't accidental, okay? Our big ones in your book, and these are found on page 98, by the way, are going to be restatement, repetition, parallelism, and rhetorical questions. Those are the four that are commonly mentioned, okay? You are responsible for knowing those four. I'm going to try to point them out to you as we see them, but you need to learn them, okay? We're also going to talk a little bit about Patrick Henry in class, but really nothing that's important as far as testing, okay? So let's go over to let's start on page 101, and we're going to look at this. And guys, I'm going to probably read sections of this with you just because it is kind of a short thing, and I'm not going to get copyright flagged for this, hopefully. So I try to take it easy on the copyright issues, but this one should be okay. So, all right, we're going to start on page 101. And this is with, and notice how Patrick Henry builds, okay? He starts out being very deferential to the people who disagree with him. Apparently some other people who just spoke in, probably on the opposite side of the argument, he gets up and he kind of addresses them, and then he kind of builds and builds and builds to where he gets the thundering finale of this. So let's look at the first paragraph. We're going to read the whole thing, and these are a little longer, so you need to pay attention, okay? Read along if you've got your book. It says, Mr. President, no man thinks more highly than I do of the patriotism as well as the abilities of the very worthy gentlemen who have just addressed the House. But different men often see the same subject in different lights, and therefore I hope it will not be thought of as disrespectful to those gentlemen if, entertaining as I do opinions of a character very opposite to theirs, I shall speak forth my sentiments freely and without reserve. This is no time for ceremony. The question before the House is one of awful moment to this country. For my own part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery, and in proportion to the magnitude of the subject ought to be the freedom of the debate. It is only in this way that we can hope to arrive at truth and fulfill the great responsibility which we hold to God and our country. Should I keep back my opinions at such a time through fear of giving offense, I should consider myself as guilty of treason toward my country and an act of disloyalty toward the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings. Now let's look at a couple of things he does really well in this paragraph. First of all, he acknowledges the previous side. This is always a useful technique. And then he goes on to basically say, I'm about to offend these people. He says, I hope I'm not going to, and I hope people realize that just because I feel differently, I'm not trying to directly attack them, but here comes the attack, in other words. When you say stuff like, well, I hope I don't offend you, but, what you're about to offend me, typically, all right? So that's what he's doing here. We know he's about to go on the completely opposite direction. He does a couple of other interesting things. He says the question before the House is one of awful moment to this country. For my own part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery. Look how strong of wording that is. He's like, basically, whichever side you come down on this, one's for freedom, one's for slavery. Now, obviously, one of those is the right choice, and we know that by the word choice he uses. So that's on purpose. And then also, look at this is a great technique, and politicians still use this today. I see them do it all the time. He says, I would consider this treason toward my country and an act of disloyalty toward the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings. Notice the name drop there by using God. All right, so that's like, if you're on the other side, then obviously God's not on your side is the implication there, okay? So a great start. Obviously, the people on the other side would probably be squirming in their seats at this point, all right? Like already they know it's coming. They're already getting frustrated and angry. But Patrick Henry is trying to be cordial and polite as he starts, but there's this undercurrent of he's about to really ruffle some feathers, okay? Let's look at the next paragraph. It says, Mr. President, it is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against the painful truth and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into beasts. Is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? Are we disposed to be of the number of those who having eyes see not and having ears hear not, the things which so nearly concern their temporal salvation? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it. So notice here he points out that what was just suggested, which was the idea, I guess, the wait-and-see attitude, or let's try to work this out in a diplomatic way with Britain. And he's basically pointing out that these people are people who are ignoring what's happening around them. You get the idea of them shutting their eyes against the painful truth and listening to the song of a siren till she transforms us into beasts, which is an illusion with an A. It is a reference to, there's two things that you're always going to need to know for illusions. The Bible itself, and then ancient Greek references will come up frequently to those two. I mean, you'll get like 90% of illusions if you just know those two, to be honest with you. So he points out basically the futility of continuing in the route they're going, that it's not going to work. And we can keep doing it, but it's going to meet with, even deadlier repercussions if we don't act soon. He says, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. Now, I love that sentence. He's like, experience tells me that if we keep going this way, things aren't going to get better. And he says, this is what's going to guide my feet. You get another, it may be accidental, but another allusion there to a biblical concept, all right? Which he's going to use a lot of that because that would be really working with these people. I mean, we were just studying the Puritans. This isn't very far removed from that time period. So a lot of these people are extremely religious. So this would be a big deal for them. Says, I know of no way of judging the future but by the past. In judging in the past, I wish to know what there was, I guess I should just use my glasses, right? And judging by the past, I wish to know what there has been in the conduct of the British ministry for the last 10 years to justify those hopes with which gentlemen have been pleased to solace themselves and the House. Is it that insidious smile with which our petition has been lately received? Trust it not, sir. It will prove a snare to your feet. Suffer not yourselves to be betrayed with a kiss. Now, notice again we have the. He's getting a little bit more. I'm going to use a level 5 word here for you, but he's getting more vitriolic. In other words, he's getting a little bit more contentious in his language here, a little bit more venomy, I guess is a good word here in his language when he says Let me find it again. So basically saying, we've been dealing with this for years now, and it hasn't worked. What makes you think it's going to now? Notice that starts to get a little bit more, angry in his speaking. And then he even compares it to Judas. You get another allusion there with being betrayed by a kiss, and that's the reference to Judas and Jesus, okay? So we're at the top of 102 now, those of you following along. It says, ask yourselves how this gracious reception of our petition comports with those warlike preparations which cover our waters and darkens our land. Are fleets and armies necessary to a work of love and reconciliation? Have we shown ourselves so unwilling to be reconciled that force must be called in to win back our love? Let us not deceive ourselves, sir. These are the implements of war and subjugation, the last arguments to which kings resort. Now, I love that. To me, that's such a powerful section where he's basically saying, if they were really going to listen to what we had to say, why do we have, guns pointed at our heads right now? He says that's what kings who are angry and their last resort is. This is not a loving monarch who's looking out for our best. So he's really pointing to the obvious here, and that's kind of important because, how would the other side combat that, All right, going ahead, he says, I ask gentlemen, sir, what means this martial array if its purpose be not to force us into submission? Can gentlemen assign any other possible motive for it? Has Great Britain any enemy in this quarter of the world to call for all this accumulation of navies and armies? No, sir, she has none. They are meant for us. They can be meant for no other. They are sent over to bind and rivet upon us those chains which the British ministry have been so long forging. So, again, very poetic language there. But we have some of the rhetorical questions there, which these questions that aren't intended to be answered, although a great technique is to go ahead and answer them like he did. He says, is this what these things are for? Is this necessary? And he says, no. So it just even more emphasizes how powerful he was speaking at this point about England is showing us everything but respect and that they are actually trying to work this out. Here's the proof that they're not, in his opinion. And you know what? It's a very solid one, to be honest with you. All right. And I got a really long paragraph coming up. It's going to make use of a lot of our rhetorical techniques. We're going to see parallelism. We're going to see some, I think it's repetition. There's a lot going on in here. So also, although this isn't one of our literary elements we're covering, his word choice is key. It's very important to look at the words he uses. He's going to use words like subjugation and things like that, which show images of slavery, which is, the American colonies were not slaves, although there were slaves there, but these men definitely were not that. But he's going to use that terminology to show how much they lack freedom, in his opinion, and what their future looks like in his mind if they don't go to war. He's already used it earlier when he said this is a matter of slavery or freedom. So let's tackle this monster paragraph. He says, and what have we to oppose to them? Shall we try argument? Sir, we've been trying that for the last 10 years. Have we anything new to offer upon the subject? Nothing. We have held the subject up in every light of which it is capable, but it has been all in vain. Shall we resort to entreaty and humble supplication? What terms shall we find which have not been already exhausted? Let us not, I beseech you, sir, deceive ourselves longer. Sir, we have done everything that could be done to avert the storm which is now coming on. We have petitioned, we have remonstrated, we have supplicated, we have prostrated ourselves before the throne, and have implored its interposition to arrest the tyrannical hands of the ministry and parliament. Now notice there's your parallel structure. Notice we got the let me find it again. We have done this, we have done this, we have done this, we have done this. That listing, which we're going to see is really heavy in the Declaration of Independence, our next work. But that is a listing technique. It's a parallel structure, parallelism, that really kind of hammers the thing home. It's like if you had a nail in there and you just feel it hammering each time you say it. And that's really what he's doing. He's giving tons of examples of we've done everything we possibly can to fix this the peaceful way. We're left with one option, and that's going to be war. We saw some more rhetorical questions, which he again answered several times, which again I think is a great technique to emphasize how important this is. Okay? All right, let's keep going. Says our petitions have been slighted, our remonstrances have produced additional violence and insult, our supplications have been disregarded, and we have been spurned with contempt from the foot of the throne. There's your parallelism again, okay? In vain after these things may we indulge the fond hope of peace and reconciliation. There is no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve and violate those inestimable privileges for which we have been so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have been so long engaged, in which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon until the glorious object of our contest shall be obtained, we must fight. I repeat, sir, we must fight. An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts, it is all that is left us. Now, notice there we had repetition, and obviously you know what repetition is. He repeated, we must fight, all right? Now, a lot of that's going to be dependent on the speaker and how they deliver that, but even if you're just reading it without hearing me read it, or heaven forbid, Patrick Henry, who would have had a lot more power in that, but even just reading it, you see the repetition shows that this is important. He said this is the whole purpose of his speech. We have to fight, okay? And he's making sure you get that. Everything else has been leading up to this point. You can imagine him thundering out, we must fight, and that's all that has left us. Now, we've still got a little left because that's not the end. You don't end right there, all right? But we've seen parallelism, we've seen rhetorical structures, we've seen repetition. So we've seen a lot of these techniques. And again, these are used all the time by speakers. These are very commonly used, okay? All right, he says, they tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be the next week or the next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed and when a British guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have bound us hand and foot? Now, again, lots of rhetorical questions there. Also, he's done something that I'd like to see you do in your argumentation, which is he's acknowledging the main counter-argument, which is, and it was a good one at the time. This was probably the most common argument used against going to war is we're going to get stomped. We're going up, a bunch of hillbilly farmers in the woods, are going up against the most powerful army on the planet, perhaps, and we're going to win, really? And that was the number one argument. But what he's pointing out here now, by the way, really smart. He's not really saying no, we're better outfitted to fight than you think. He basically says, if we don't do it now, when will we? So he's indicating, it's going to get worse. We need to do it now. Now's the best time. That's really not the argument they're making, but he does a good job of taking their argument and kind of at least addressing it, okay? So it'd be harder for them to come back and respond by saying, well, we're not ready, and Patrick Henry could easily say, I acknowledge that, but, so he's pointing to how to combat that, and he's not really combating it. If you really break down his argument, he's not saying, yeah, we're going to win. He's just saying, if we're not going to do it now, then we never will have that opportunity. Okay, keep going. He says, sir, we are not weak. Okay, well, there you go. He does say it, right? If we make a proper use of those means which the God of nature hath placed in our power. Oh, there's the trick. Now he's going to use another really great trick. He's not going to acknowledge that their army is better, all right? He's going to say God's on our side. And, at that point, what, you're going to get up after Patrick Henry and say, no, we're going to lose? Oh, what, so you're saying you don't believe in God? Are you not thinking God is on our side? And, you really get defeated there. And, again, this is a technique that we see used by politicians constantly and in arguments all the time. The person who wants to claim that God's on their side, it really puts the other side at a disadvantage. Now, it can be combated because there's lots of reasons if you were on the other side to say, what makes you think God's on your side? Well, why did you decide that? So you could easily go against this argument, but if you're hearing someone deliver this with a great power and stuff, and you're a strong believer like most of these people probably were, then this is a great technique to really get you behind it. It says 3 millions of people armed in the holy cause of liberty in such a country as that which we possess are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us. So he's saying, we got 3 million people who are God's on our side, and we're invincible against anything the enemy can do to us. Now, by the way, those of you who studied your history know we had our fair share of whoopings, especially at the beginning of this war. So obviously, that's not totally true, but it's enough to get people through the door, which is all Patrick Henry's trying to get them to do. Okay? It says, besides, sir, we shall not fight our battles alone. There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations and who will raise up friends to fight our battles for us. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, and the brave. So again, he's focusing on their strengths, which is not in their numbers or their strength. It is in the fact that their cause is just, in his opinion, which I would agree with that statement for sure. He says, besides, sir, we have no election. If we were base enough to desire, it is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanging may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat, sir, let it come. Now, again, there's your repetition. But he's pointing out here that it doesn't matter if we decide to try to fix things now. We've already made England so mad that there's going to be repercussions for our actions, and we're going to end up in war eventually. So now's the time. Why put ourselves in a situation where it's going to be even harder? Okay? Really, really powerful argument, really well set up. All right, last paragraph. It says, it is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And there's that famous line. Notice all the references to chains and slavery and all that, which if they were to be, continue on as British citizens, there would probably be a lot more taxation. There would be a lot of other issues they would suffer. Slavery is probably not what would happen. They're not going to all of a sudden make all these people, these British, not British citizens, these citizens, slaves. That's not what's going to happen. But he's using that to really hammer home what their lack of freedom they're going to have is. And it's a really powerful argument. Obviously his audience are the people who are on the fence here, okay? He's not going to change the ultra loyalists who have no desire to fight England. And there's already a significant portion who are on board with this fight. He's aiming at that middle ground. He's doing what a good politician should. This is what presidential elections should be about. It should be about that middle ground, okay? The people who are going to vote Democrat no matter what are going to vote Democrat no matter what. The people who are going to vote Republican are going to vote Republican no matter what. It honestly doesn't matter what either of their candidates say or do. We've seen this happen in many me an election that that group is just, they're entrenched. Nothing will convince them otherwise. Okay? That middle ground, though, is where money should be spent. The sad thing is a lot of politicians spend so much time courting their actual base instead of looking at the middle ground. Patrick Henry doesn't. He looks right at the middle ground. He says, okay, what do I need to convince you? Here's my attack plan. He lays it out for them. He attacks the argument that the other side he knows is going to use, so that, and in fact, the people who are in the middle ground are already thinking that too, and he makes sure that that's been addressed. It's actually a brilliant speech. It's a great example of how to set up an argument. Everything about this is terrific. I don't like the whole lean on God example, but I feel like Patrick Henry's probably doing it because he feels that way, because this is a time period where people their faith was a lot more grounded than I think ours is today. I kind of frown on when that's used today, when people automatically throw God into a political situation. I feel like that's a really cheap move, with the exception of very few topics that I think definitely would have that, God's stamp on, for or against. I think a lot of times we use that without thinking. We just tend to associate my side's good, so God's on my side. I don't always think that's the safest route to travel. I think it's a very irresponsible one, to be honest with you. But in this instance, I see what he was doing, and I feel like this, if you were to look at the American population versus the British population at this time, God probably would smile more on the Americans. They were, at least most of them, bigger into their faith. I know that's a horrible way to say that, but more serious about their faith, okay? All right, guys, so real quick, I'm going to pull up something on my computer. You won't be able to see it. I just want to check. I want to make sure I covered everything that's on the little notes I put up. All right, so let me pull these. We've got... So if you're looking on your weekly agenda at week 7, it could be 6 or 7, they're the same thing now. But week 7, Tuesday, we've got stuff about, we talked about the rhetorical devices. I gave you that. The Patrick Henry bio is there in the book. I'd like you to look over that. Those of you who are in class, we may have mentioned him briefly. We talked about how he introduces and how he concedes points to achieve purpose. We did that. We talked about the illusions. I think we've covered all of this, actually. Yeah, this is great, okay? So the only thing that we didn't directly talk about in this video that I want to save for class, those of you who are watching this from home and weren't in class, this isn't going to be on your test, really. It's just going to be a practical skill that I want to share. And that's the last one that says lessons we can learn from these speeches about how to handle contentious arguments today. And we're going to talk about that, okay? So I'm going to stop the video here. There's actually there's another section that we wanted to look at as well, where Benjamin Franklin gave a speech in the convention. But here's what I'm going to do. I want you to read that, okay? I'm not going to make a video for this one. I want you to read it. It's on pages 105 through 107. It's really actually pretty short. I want you to read it, and I want you to look at how it's similar to the Patrick Henry speech and how it's also different in some way, and know that that's going to be a big part of your test when we do test on this, okay? Those of you watching this from home who don't have the benefit of being in class with me, write some questions down and send them to me so I know you're paying attention about, or some observations. They don't even have to be questions, just some observations you had about how these are similar, how they're different, and any questions you have as well. Because I don't want to feed you everything just through the videos. I want you to do some of the work on your own as well. And that goes for the people in class too. I'm going to let you take a lot more of the lead on this second speech, okay? All right, guys. Well, let's stop here. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to this. Hopefully it helped. I enjoy when I can read it to you and kind of discuss it as we go, but just know that copywriting prevents me from doing that with a lot of these, okay? So, all right, guys, well, have a wonderful time. I hope you're all safe from that storm. I hope that everyone's, regaining power. I hope that all that's back in line and your life is returning to some sense of at least COVID normalcy, all right? So, guys, thanks again, and we will talk to you for the next video, which is going to be about the Declaration of Independence.